Hey guys, Welsknight here. I wanted to give you an update on the copyright situation I talked about in yesterday's video, as well as cover a few more common misconceptions I often see about copyright on YouTube. Regarding the DMCA takedown and copyright strike I received from Game Show Network, I am very happy to report that their claim has been retracted. The strike has been removed from my channel and the video is now back on YouTube. All is well on that front. Now, for the meat and potatoes of today's video, I want to address 10 copyright-related things that I just didn't talk about yesterday. If you haven't seen yesterday's video yet, I highly encourage you to watch that one first, as I will be using some terminology which I explained in yesterday's video. You'll find a link in the description and in the iCard in the upper right. I would also like to remind you that although I was a paralegal for over a decade, I am not a lawyer. Nothing I say in this video should be considered legal advice, and everything I say should be taken with a grain of salt. Finally, much like yesterday's video, this is going to be a very podcasty episode with very little happening on screen. So feel free to minimize the video and do something else while you listen. Without further ado, let's dive into 10 more things which people often get wrong when it comes to copyright and YouTube, in no particular order. Number 1. No copyright infringement intended. Creators who are unaware of how copyright works often put something like, "I don't own this, no copyright infringement intended," into their video description, thinking that it gives them a free pass to use copyrighted material. This is not a thing. This is not how copyright works. You either have a license to use something, or you don't. Simply saying, "I'm not intending to break the law," does not excuse you from breaking the law. If you walk into a department store, grab something, and walk out without paying for it, but then you tell the police no theft was intended, you will still face the consequences of stealing. Likewise, writing "no copyright infringement intended" into your video description does not protect you in any way, shape, or form from the consequences of violating copyright law. Number 2. It's okay. I don't monetize my videos. Whether or not a video is monetized generally doesn't matter when it comes to copyright. Again, you either have a license to use something or you don't, except for fringe cases where the license for whatever material you're trying to use explicitly says you can use it in non-monetized videos. Then you're still violating copyright law, even though your video is not monetized, and can still face the penalties such as DMCA takedowns and strikes against your account. Number 3, copyright-free and no copyright material. There is an abundance of channels, artists, and creators out there offering copyright-free or no copyright material to use in your videos. No copyright songs, copyright-free music. Not only is this terminology completely wrong, I personally believe it's one of the major contributing factors to how much misinformation is spread regarding copyright on YouTube. Copyright-free music does not exist. No copyright music does not exist. The only exceptions to this are works for which the copyright has expired, causing the work to enter into public domain. What an artist offering copyright-free music is actually offering you is a license to use their copyrighted music, usually under something like a Creative Commons attribution license. What people call a no copyright sound effect is a sound effect licensed under something like a general public license. Essentially, you do not have copyright-free music. You have copyrighted music, which you have a license and permission to use. All created works inherently have some level of copyright. Even though I might get a piece of music from an artist that is offering copyright-free music, I do not own that music. I cannot claim it as my own. I can't charge other people to use it, and I can exert no control over how it is used by other people. I do not hold the copyright to that music. Instead, I have a license which grants me permission to use it and which lays out the conditions for its use, such as, for example, a requirement to credit the original artist. Number 4, this person or company is abusing the YouTube copyright system. While abuse of YouTube's copyright system certainly does happen, in the vast majority of cases, content ID matches and copyright claims are either valid or simply a mistake or an accident. Sometimes something ends up in YouTube's automated content ID system that shouldn't, such as an individual YouTuber claiming footage from a game trailer that they didn't create. This is, in the vast majority of cases, not intentional, and almost always gets remedied with a little bit of patience. Sometimes Content ID does not correctly identify something because it sounds similar to something that actually is supposed to be in the system, such as in cases where they try to claim a wind sound as part of a song, for example. Again, this is almost always not intentional, and is usually remedied with a little bit of patience by going through the normal dispute process. The reality is, especially when dealing with automated systems such as YouTube's Content ID, mistakes can and do happen. It does not automatically mean that a YouTuber or a company that is claiming things is evil or malicious, or that they are intentionally abusing YouTube's copyright systems. Number 5, this random company has no right to claim this. This is often the first thing many YouTubers say when they get a copyright claim, and sometimes they are correct. However, before filing a counterclaim or a dispute, you should be absolutely certain that you are correct. Artists can grant the ability to claim copyright to another organization, such as a record label. If possible, check with the artist directly and find out if the claim is valid. Number 6, images and pictures are fine. I just have to avoid using songs and video clips. Images and pictures are still copyrighted. Just because you can find an image on Google image search does not mean that you can use it. If you're going to use an image or picture which is not your own original work, contact the creator of it and get permission to do so. Also, keep in mind that some websites rehost images without the original creator's permission. Do a little digging before using an image and attempt to verify that you are actually getting it from the original creator and that you do indeed have permission to use it. Number 7, my video is transformative. Transformative is a term that gets thrown around often in relation to fair use and copyright on YouTube. In layman's terms, what it means is that your video uses material from someone else, but it uses it in such a way that the final result is something else entirely. However, transformative is subjective, and like the rest of fair use doctrine, can only be ultimately determined by a judge in a court of law. In order for a work to be considered transformative in nature, it is not enough for it to simply be different. It essentially boils down to whether or not your video serves as a market substitute for the original. I touched on this briefly in yesterday's video, but I want to go a little bit more in depth on it. The fourth factor of fair use is the effect of the use upon the potential market for or the value of the copyrighted work. This does not mean whether the infringing content will cause a negative impact on the public perception of the original work, causing them to not buy it, such as in the case of a negative review. What it is referring to is whether or not the new work can serve as a substitute for the original. That is, whether or not people would have a reason to purchase the original after purchasing the new work. Bringing it back to YouTube, a good example of this misconception relates to montages or reaction videos. Just because you edit a bunch of clips together does not mean your work is transformative in nature. Different does not necessarily mean transformative. Number 8, but my fair use. As we talked about yesterday, fair use is a legal defense to a copyright lawsuit. That means that in order to invoke fair use, you have to actually be sued for copyright infringement. And when you go to court, you basically say, yeah, I did use their copyrighted material, but it's fine because of fair use. Per the 1994 Supreme Court case Campbell versus Acuff Rose Music Incorporated, 510 U.S. 569, fair use is an affirmative defense. This means the burden of proof when it comes to fair use, that is, whose responsibility it is to prove that the use was or was not fair, is on the defendant. And again, whether a specific use falls under fair use is only determined on a case-by-case basis in a court of law. It is not the responsibility of the claimant to prove the use was not fair use. It is the responsibility of the person who used the copyrighted material to prove that it falls under fair use. Number 9, what about innocent until proven guilty? Innocent until proven guilty is the foundation of the United States criminal justice system. However, copyright lawsuits are not usually criminal in nature. They are civil. Likewise, even in the U.S. criminal justice system, some types of defenses are affirmative. That is, the burden to prove it lies with the accused, such as with self-defense, for example. The prosecution must still prove that the accused committed the crime, whatever that crime may be, but in the case of an affirmative defense, the accused basically says, yeah, I did do that, but it's okay because self-defense, or whatever. Bringing it back to YouTube, it is not YouTube's responsibility to mediate legal proceedings between a YouTuber and a claimant. They are not a court of law. Their only job is to follow the rules laid out in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Innocent until proven guilty does not apply to YouTube. Number 10, it's okay to use Mozart because it's public domain. After enough time passes following an artist's death, their work usually enters into the public domain. All or most of the works of classical composers like Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart are public domain. Works in the public domain can be used freely for just about anything. However, that only applies to the original works themselves, not performances or rearrangements of them. You cannot use a recording of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's performance of Beethoven's Symphony No. 2 in your video. Although Beethoven's Symphony No. 2 is public domain, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra's performance of it is not. And for an honorable mention, because 10 things sounds better than 11, I have permission to play this game, so I have permission to use everything in it. Sometimes game developers will license music to be used in their games. However, that license does not necessarily translate over to granting YouTubers permission to use that music in their own videos. A good example of this would be something like the radio from Grand Theft Auto or the music in Madden. Just because a game developer got a license from Kendrick Lamar to put his song ADHD into their game does not mean Kendrick Lamar has granted you a license to include that song in your videos. As a general rule of thumb, if you've heard the song on the radio, or if it's by a mainstream artist, you probably can't use it. Now, I think it's about time to wrap this one up. Legitimate copyright issues on YouTube are fairly easy to avoid. Basically, just don't use anything that isn't an original work unless you know you have explicit permission to do so. Always do a bit of research and find a license in writing whenever possible. Likewise, illegitimate copyright issues on YouTube are almost always an accident or a mistake, and rarely the result of abuse. Have a little patience, go through the dispute process, and everything will usually work out just fine. I hope you learned a little bit about YouTube and copyright from this video. If you haven't seen yesterday's video about many of the other misconceptions regarding copyright on YouTube, you will find a link to it in the description. I will try to answer any further questions you have in the comments down below. If you got something out of this video, please leave a like and remember to share this video with anyone who believes any of the misconceptions we talked about today. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.